Hi everybody, welcome to another CareerFoundry live event this evening. I'm William, Events and Communications Lead here at CareerFoundry, and I'm welcomed by Ed Wood, who is CareerFoundry's CMO, and John-Erik, who actually worked once together with Ed Wood at Babbel in Berlin. Now, whilst people are joining, just drop your name in the chat on the right-hand side. We'd love to see where people are joining from. Also, maybe why you're interested in UX design. But before we kick off, let me briefly introduce you to CareerFoundry. So we are the online school for your career change into tech, and we provide personalized programs in data analytics, digital marketing, product management, UI design, and UX design, which is the topic of conversation this evening. Wait a minute. Ed, my script's just gone. Do you just want to... yeah. But we also give you one-on-one mentorship, so the dual mentorship model that we have here. So with a mentor and a tutor, and that's not all. We also have a job guarantee too. So if you don't get a job within 6 months of graduating, you get your money back. I would just, sorry, my computer's just, it's all good, it's all good. I'm going to pass you over now, and I'm going to fade into the background. If anyone's got any questions, just drop them in the chat on the right-hand side, and any more specific questions, we'll answer them as we are going along. Ed's going to be the moderator this evening, and John is a UX design graduate. So we are very happy to have you all this evening. And Ed, I'm going to pass it over to you and hope that my computer stays online. Okay.
If we lose you, just shoot a flare or something.
If you lose me, you lose me. It just happens. Okay. So Ed, you've got control, and I will blend into the background.
I think even nowadays you can't have a webinar without one or two technical difficulties to kick it off. So from me as well, welcome, John-Erik. It's great to see you. We'll certainly work together, but it's been a while since we caught up. And most importantly, it's I don't think we've caught up since you made the career change and landed that first job.
That is true.
Yeah. So obviously 2023 is just around the corner. We're bound to have a lot of people that are considering the career change and making the same kind of first steps towards the career change that you made. So the idea behind this session is basically to talk through your career change, and then give advice to anyone that is in the same position as you were about a year ago or so. First of all, it'd be fantastic if you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit and talk through where you're from originally, and one or two of the more recent kind of professional experiences before you even kind of started thinking about that career change.
Sure. So hi, I'm John-Erik. I'm from Los Angeles originally. I went to university in New York, and then I ended up in Berlin about 13 years ago, and I'm still here. I studied fine art in undergrad, which means that about 3 months before graduating, I realized I was screwed, and I sort of panicked, thinking about like how to actually have a job from there. I went into video editing. Was kind of like my first life. The first stage of my career was as a video editor. When I moved to Berlin, that broadened into more types of editorial stuff, including copy editing and copywriting. And that's why I ended up meeting you, because when I got sick of the freelancer thing, I ended up as a SEO writer at Babbel, and that turned into a content writer, turned into a content marketing manager. And that was the second phase of like content creator sort of morphing into a marketer. It was at the point of, after being at Babbel 6 years, when I would say the main kind of frustration, the main, let's say like the sort of itch that I had doing marketing that let's say opened up the possibility of thinking about UX design, was that I was getting frustrated writing lots of content that was supplemental to a digital product and about the digital product, and sometimes supplemental to the point that when the digital product didn't do something, the sort of marketing material we had these sort of like this network of landing pages that would kind of have sort of, let's say, extracurricular sort of like Babbel language learning content. And I guess that I was tired of I would say I was doing, like, without realizing it, maybe 40% of a UX designer's role, but not actually having a seat at the table when it comes to product design. And I think that's when I was like, maybe I kind of want to be inside the room of the people making decisions about a product.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the kind of push and pull factors, this idea of being kind of frustrated in your current role. What would you say were the kind of pull factors, or what was pulling you towards UX design, aside from this kind of influence within the product area?
I think it was just the fact that I consider myself a bit of a generalist, and I guess I have always have been. Maybe the fact that I studied art, but that already sort of puts you in a position of like, okay, I'm not just going to somehow like take the job of the thing I studied for, because you're not going to like answer a ad for artists, like, or in very specific types of circumstances. And I guess I wanted to maintain being a generalist rather than a specialist, and which I feel good about right now, because considering, let's say, the climate in tech and with layoffs and stuff, I think generalists are in a slightly more robust position than super specialized people. And I was, interested in doing something that could sort of balance. I had gained a lot of sort of analytic experience from marketing, but I wanted to still be creative, and maybe not just, let's say, with writing, but sort of, I was like, oh, maybe I can do something that actually draws more on my training and passion for visual art. So yeah, that was maybe the pull factor. The visual.
Were there any kind of competing professions, or was it a fairly straightforward decision that UX design was the one for you?
I felt like that was the one for me, wanting to be a kind of like generalist problem solver who could kind of like, depending on what the issue was, sort of jump in, and every week there's like a different knot to untie and some other kind of challenge. I love puzzles, and I sometimes feel like I have a lot of fun at work because I feel like I'm just sort of solving puzzles. Yeah.
So UX was the one. It's interesting.
Yeah, because I think anything else would have been more of a, like, let's say, drilling down even more into a certain, like, if I'd stayed within marketing, I had just also sort of ended up as a team lead. So it was also like I was getting a lot of soft skill type experience at Babbel. But I think I wanted to be able to just like kind of do the kind of work where you're collaborating and in meetings and making decisions, but then you have the opportunity to, like, the next day kind of work solo and like dig into your design files and make stuff. And so I think, it's just kind of, if you're sort of like a creative all-rounder who doesn't want to get nailed down as like, oh, I only, to be like an illustrator or someone, I think, I like to keep my options open, maybe, and like to be surprised by what's on my to-do list every week.
Yeah. I think, like marketing, I mean, I guess it's true of a lot of fields, but maybe even more so with marketing and UX design, there are a lot of opportunities to specialize further as well, right? To go deeper into UX research, or into the UI side, for example, or into, I even see people graduating into UX writing, for example, from UX design background. So there seems to be a lot, especially as the field kind of becomes more and more professionalized and starts to fragment a little bit potentially, then there are quite a lot of opportunities there as well.
Yeah, and I wouldn't rule out specializing more in the future, but at least I feel like I'm in the right area that I want to be in. Whereas any further specialization from this point will very much be, in the area that I'm enjoying.
Yep.
I think that specializing more in marketing would have pushed me maybe a little bit more out of my creative brain space.
So if we imagine that you're in this position where you've decided that UX design is the field for you, how did you go about deciding basically how to kind of execute that career change? Because obviously there are different options of self-learning, returning to university and doing a longer program, or they're the kind of programs that CareerFoundry offers. And obviously, as much as I wish CareerFoundry were the only provider, there are lots of other schools in this kind of area. So how did you go from basically deciding UX design was for you to deciding the method and deciding to go with CareerFoundry in the end?
Okay, so basically, I think it came down to, like, in the research that I did, it came down to the what would make me feel the most confident after finishing to say, okay, I actually know this. So there were certain programs that seemed like too easy almost, or it was like, wait, this is way too fast. Like I sort of, like, there was one that I was looking at. I don't necessarily remember all of them, but there's one that is affiliated with a university in the UK, but it's also online, but its actual curriculum is pretty much the equivalent of the intro to UX design, which is just the first chapter of the UX design course. So I could have finished that faster, and I could have had something on a piece of paper that says, oh, look, this is affiliated with a university. It might have sort of had a certain kind of weight. Let's say if someone's looking for like a CV, wanting to see like the, university, but I wouldn't have known what the heck I was doing. And I really, I wanted to feel like I had enough experience through the course I was going to do, that when it came to doing that in real life, it wasn't theoretical. It wasn't like, oh, I read something about this, but it was like, oh, I've done this. And I've done it in a way where I, worked on it, got feedback, talked to my mentor about it, like really. So I just wanted something robust enough, because I didn't really want to be in a like fake it till you make it position if I'm going to make this big of a commitment to a change, Yeah.
So you mentioned,
when we started working together in 2014, I was faking it till I made it. I can admit that now.
Right? Everyone
I admit it now, but I didn't. I wasn't going to make that kind of leap in my late 30s. I wanted a little more certainty. Yeah.
But I think a little bit of that niggling sense of imposter syndrome is always difficult to get rid of, right?
Yeah, and I think everyone feels it, but the difference is if you recognize a bit of imposter syndrome and you say, okay, but I still know what to do. I still, even if it's a matter of like, in my first couple of weeks at my job, I sometimes would log in to my CareerFoundry account and just like remind myself of like the project that I did related to this thing I needed to do, just to like, okay, I'm just going to check, and it was nice to sort of have that, sort of just to fall back on, and a sense of like, oh yeah, okay, that's right. I do know this. I did do it. It was validated by other people who gave it feedback. So yeah.
So coming to that feedback specifically, you mentioned your mentor, and in the intro, Will mentioned the dual mentorship model. So just to give a bit of an explanation behind that. So one of the things that kind of makes CareerFoundry special is the level of human support that you get throughout the program. So as soon as you start, you get assigned a mentor and a tutor. Your tutor gives you written feedback on all the task submissions that you do throughout the entire program. And the mentor gives you both video feedback and is available for calls throughout the program to give you kind of professional advice and feedback on all the portfolio projects that you put together. So you really have that one-to-one dedicated time with the professionals in the industry, so to speak. And then you also have a dedicated career specialist as well to kind of help you develop your portfolio and your interview skills and get you ready for that job search period as well. So you have that little team to support you throughout the whole program. They typically stay the same people throughout the program as well. And that's obviously a super important part of the entire experience. So with that introduction, I just kind of wanted to talk to you about that, but also about kind of the entire experience of the program, because obviously it is, as you said, an investment, not in terms of time and in terms of the effort that you put into it to make the career change. So how was the entire experience, and how are the ups and downs throughout that experience as well?
Well, the first thing I can say is that the thing that, let's say, smooths out the ups and downs and keeps and kept me motivated, and also kept me, I guess, grounded a bit, was the fact that you have these like actual humans who you're in touch with on a regular basis. Because if you just look at the learning material on its own, it can become very monolithic, and it can be easy to lose a sense of context and scale. And it was very useful to sort of, after doing a certain assignment, being able to get the feedback from my tutor, like, oh, well, here's other ways that people do it. And, it's, this is like a method that's popular, but I just want to, she was always sort of sharing additional information, and also pointing out, as, the tutor and the mentor were people like working as UX designers in the industry. They just kind of helped me understand that the UX process is not some dogma to follow. It's guidelines. It's sort of helping you to think about how you think, almost, so that you just have this awareness to understand, like, okay, here's all these different tools. It makes sense that like this technique leads to that, but you don't want to get so stuck in thinking that this is the set in stone thing. It's just that I feel that once you have a level of comfort in it, you can say, okay, this is my toolbox. It's a huge toolbox. It's lots of tools. I know how to use all of them. But in this case, I know that I'm only going to use these 3. I'm not going to sort of, you really aren't going to, you want to know everything, but you don't actually, like in designing new features or doing, let's say, improvements, you're not sort of saying, okay, start with step 1 and go all the way through all the steps every time. You would be sort of becoming like beholden to the process rather than the process working for you. And I think that having their feedback kept me understanding the big picture and understanding that what I was learning was going to be useful to my job, but it wasn't meant to be like replicated exactly. It's like, you want to know all of these things. Here's certain patterns, certain things that work for lots of people, but I feel like they always kept it relevant to me. And yeah.
And out of interest, are there any similarities or transferable things from the kind of content production process that you would have followed previously? And I mean, to be honest, if I remember rightly, that you kind of built up at Babbel, and the processes that you use nowadays?
Well, I think, yeah, there definitely are some. Like I said, I was sort of, without realizing it, doing about 40% of the UX designer's job, because there wasn't anyone doing UX officially at Babbel at that time. So there wasn't, again, like doing marketing, we didn't really have access to actual people. So that was a lot more of the quantitative kind of information about user behavior rather than qualitative. And that was the qualitative part is what I learned a lot about through CareerFoundry. But in terms of being able to, let's say, we, as you know, and I'm sure as you still do, we spent a lot of time in Google Analytics, like just looking at how people were consuming the marketing content we were creating to figure out how to optimize it. So I think that, so on that side of a little bit of like the quantitative part of user research, there was a bit of that already from marketing. And then also when it came to usability testing, there was some of that as well, because, we had this online magazine, or, we were the marketing department for Babbel, but the online magazine sort of was like a mini product in its own right. So there was a lot of work that we did over the years to figure out how to how to optimize it. So it's sort of, but again, it was very specific to marketing. So we were optimizing conversion elements and, like little bits of text, like with very, like certain headlines and things. It all came down to, like changing 2 letters in a word could have this huge effect. So I would say the scope was limited, but it was similar kind of stuff that you need to do when you're doing usability testing to say, like, is this working for people? For us, we weren't able to be fully concerned about whether they had like the full, rich, wonderful experience of reading our content that we were hoping. But so that's what I meant by limited. We were using a lot of sort of UX methodologies, but for the sake of making sure that people would click on the thing to try the demo.
So now, out of interest, when you look back at the time there, do you think, oh, we should have done this and we should have done that, and it would have been 100 times better if we had taken that approach?
Well, what I can say is that after sort of now working as a UX designer for almost a year, and after going through the program and understanding these, it's almost more like values, I would say, more than like exact like rules. But I would say that we spend a lot of time with this kind of like just not having always the most relevant information, or a kind of like, oh, we want to test this. And it would just be that like a bunch of people in a room would start shouting out ideas about, oh, we could do it just, we could make the button orange. Oh, we could make it green. Oh, what if we put it here? And it was just kind of like kind of spitballing at the wall, like throwing stuff and seeing what sticks. And it was a bit, I think that probably it was a bit sort of wasteful. And I think that if we had, if I had known what I know now, I think we could have gone about it in a more focused way, with like, you know, getting proper qualitative feedback from a small group of relevant people would have answered a lot of those questions before we actually did A/B tests. It was sort of like A/B test was the only tool. Okay, you want to find something out, do an A/B test. And there's a lot that you can do before you get to the point of the A/B test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Changing tack a little bit, I wanted to talk about portfolios, because obviously through all the programs, regardless if you're doing UX or UI or web development, then you build a portfolio through the CareerFoundry programs, and then the idea is that you use that portfolio obviously to apply to jobs when you've graduated, or even before graduation. And this, like, personally for me is super interesting, because it's not a typical thing, or hasn't been up until now, to have marketing portfolios. And since I started kind of interviewing for a broader range of positions, designers, developers, etc., it's an extremely big help to understand the candidate and understand their track record and their skill set to have a portfolio. And in our new marketing program, it is something that you do as well. You build out this portfolio. But could you talk through, so that everyone can kind of understand what's involved in that throughout the program, how you kind of put it together progressively, and then progressing from that point of portfolio building, how did you then start the job search process?
Okay. So another thing that I liked about the program is that the portfolio is the goal, basically having a really strong case study to put in your portfolio. It is the goal. So it isn't like you do the course and then you say, okay, now time to make my case study. The milestones, basically the end of every section has the result of which I would say is a piece of that final case study. You're not necessarily gonna sort of take all of them and just like plop them together in Figma and make like a super long PDF out of them, because it's almost too much information. But each of those basically is like, you have that milestone, so you sort of say, okay, this is the template, let's say, from which I'm going to edit down. And so basically, like my case study was like every end of section kind of larger assignment edited down and just thrown together, because eventually, so it's like the structure was there. I didn't have to think too much about how to put this together. It was most of the effort was like, okay, I've done all of this, but I don't want, you know, a 50-page case study. So I'm just going to now like kind of make a greatest hits of it kind of as the actual case study that I shared. One thing I have to say, it doesn't get, or I didn't really know as much about it until I was already doing the program, but there's the additional course, like the job prep course, makes a huge difference. I thought I knew better. I thought I didn't need it. It's like, oh, come on, I don't need someone to tell me how to apply for jobs. And so before I had started the job prep course, I was like in, let's say, like the last few weeks of the main UX course. I started applying to jobs. It's like, okay, well, I just, you know, I was getting impatient and maybe a little like nervous. And so I just started applying to stuff. And I can say that of like the 20 or 30 jobs I had applied to before I finished the job prep course, I'd say I got, you know, I got maybe interviews for 2 of those, and neither of them went further than 1 interview. And then afterwards, the 20 or 30 that I applied to, let's say officially, as I should have done, like with all the information from the job prep course, I would, I don't remember exactly how many interviews I had from that, but I do remember that basically it was like from the point that I properly finished it, I had found a job in a month. So there's a lot to be said for the way that that course helps you craft your CV, because the portfolio piece is important, but the way that helps you craft your CV, the way that helps you think about networking, not as collecting strangers on LinkedIn, which I think a lot of people think networking is, but like properly finding quality connections and investing some time in that. And the other thing I'll say is that you are not, it's very unlikely you're going to get a job based on a single portfolio piece. So as much as the piece that is the result of your CareerFoundry course, as much as that's really important, and I think it has a lot of weight to it, you want at least one other thing. And I know that a lot of people, I don't know if this is still the case, but when I was like a year ago, a lot of people would make their other one, they would choose an existing platform or thing and say, oh, I'm going to like fix it. What I personally think is not good about that and might sort of undermine your credibility is that in order to do that, it's pretty much just like a UI exercise, because you don't know all the stuff that the company knows that led them to design it the way it is. And if you say you're going to change it, it's a little bit flimsy. It's not an opportunity to show what data you collected and how you came to these decisions and what you tried, because if you think you know better than Spotify how to like redesign their homepage, you don't have the data they have, and it's gonna look a little bit transparent, I think, if you try to rely on that as your second portfolio piece. What I think makes a lot more sense, especially for people who are, let's say, mid-career changers, is you use all of your UX experience that you've gotten through the course to reframe your old job and say, okay, if I now look at my previous job, knowing what I know as a UX designer, how would I tell the story of the UX design I did? At the time I did it, I maybe didn't know it was called that. I didn't know all the terms, but basically because I'm convinced that because it's such a broad, since UX is such a broad set of skills, no matter what you did before, there is something that's relevant. There is at least one thing that you can reframe as UX design, and I don't think you'd be overstepping any boundaries to show the UX design you did before you were a UX designer. And so what I ended up doing was that I just went through all of the iterations of Babel magazine, which, the fact that we started with this very wonky kind of MVP landing page, and then I just sort of chronicled what it looked like, things that we changed and why, and obviously I was not like taking notes on all this stuff over the 6 years I worked there, but the what is it called, the time machine, what is it called, archive.org, like you can
archives or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I think it's something through archive.org or just the time machine or whatever it's called. I was able to go back and just find, I was able to get screenshots of like, this is what it looked like in April 2014. This is what this page looked like in December 2014. And I just was able to tell the story of, So I think that
that's
that
brilliant
made
advice.
a bigger impression, because the main thing that people will say in interviews when they say no is to be like, oh yeah, it's, it seems good. It's all interesting, but it's they can sometimes, if people are a little bit risk averse, they'll say, oh, but we feel a lot more comfortable if you already had a year of UX experience. And if you can just say, well, this is the UX I've already done, it just makes you look like less of a newbie, because I don't think anyone here, unless you're, unless like the job you're going to get after doing CareerFoundry is the first job you've ever had, then you have transferable skills. You have a story to tell about the kind of UX way of thinking that you've already demonstrated. And the fact that you've arrived here wanting to do UX means that it's been on your mind, and you must be good at some of it before learning how to do it officially. So yeah, you can just nip that in the bud, and you can say, here's how I already did it.
I think just putting myself in the shoes of the interviewer in that situation, then it immediately communicates a kind of approach to growth, recognizing your own mistakes, and humility as well. If you immediately shows that kind of career growth, if you say, okay, these are all the things that I did wrong in the past, and these are all the things that I would now do better with the knowledge I have, is the kind of perfect message, I think, to communicate in any interview. You want that mix of kind of humility and willingness to grow, and awareness of one's own shortcomings as well. So very, very cool advice. Is that something you kind of came up with yourself throughout the program, or is it something that's kind of actively advised or suggested to you?
So that was suggested by my mentor.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying, he had said, because I think that when we first started out, I told him that I was really interested in learning Figma, and that's not directly part of the course because it's sort of platform agnostic. Mm-hmm. But I told him I want to learn it. And so he encouraged me to basically do all my assignments in Figma to begin with. It's like, the more you use it, the more you get used to it. And he gave me a couple side assignments. And when it was just for the sake of learning how to use Figma, he did have me redesign existing pages, or even try to like copy them. But he said, this is just for the sake of learning how to use the tool. He's like, do not mistake this for, he sort of said, this is not a portfolio piece. Don't rely on this for showing your UX skills. Yeah, and then and I think a combination of that, and then also the job prep course also really like hammers home, like, don't act like your hireability starts with when you started learning UX in this course. Like, you always have something in the past to draw upon, and it's just a matter of like reframing it.
I thought what you mentioned earlier as well is really common. I think that's probably the single biggest discrepancy between the kind of reality and expectations of the program is the job prep course. That everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people come into the program and just people in general expecting to know kind of innately how to apply for jobs, and don't see it as a skill that can be acquired or can be learned as well. Yeah. And you see this huge difference in people's perspective when they finish the job prep course and realize that there are these kind of tactics to be learned in order to, or even strategies to be learned in order to increase the chance of success. And then again, as kind of like a hiring manager, you just see a huge discrepancy, right, of the quality of applications and the how specific to the role the applications are as well. Yeah. I want to move on then before we take some questions from the audience, just to talk about the new role. So you landed the new role, obviously. How long has it been now that you've been?
Almost a year. I started in January this year, so it was very nice timing with like new year, new beginnings. Yeah. And yeah, so I've been there almost a year. It's a small startup called Impera that's here in Germany. Of course, we're in Germany, Berlin. I can be more specific. In Berlin, and it is basically a cloud-based platform for the construction industry for a lot of different things, but the core of it is the tendering process. So what I have to say is that I love like kind of nitty-gritty practical things, and I was very happy to first of all find a startup, because I know that maybe people are often maybe looking for jumping into like a bigger company and something where they can already go to be more specialized. But what I can say is that if you go into a startup, you will find a much easier one-to-one connection between this is what I learned and this is what I'm going to do now, because no one told me how to do my job. No one told me what tools to use, what methods, anything. It was really like the company didn't have a UX designer before. They knew they needed one because they basically, the product manager was getting frustrated by being in a room full of engineers who were solving problems from a certain point of view, and were kind of ticking off things to do on a list, but there was really there was a bit of a disconnect, also because they had, of course, started making this MVP before there were any users, and it got to the point where it's like, okay, people are starting to use this. We need someone to kind of like listen to them and get their feedback plugged in right away, because otherwise, what the product team is doing and what they think they're doing can become very, very different things if you're not like on a regular basis getting feedback. So there wasn't anything wrong with the product before. It was more just like, okay, we have our MVP. Before we get this in front of real users' eyeballs, who were going to be like asking them to like pay for this eventually, like they knew they needed that, but no one in the team had ever worked with a UX designer before. Like, so it was really like, on one hand, it was really nice that no one could tell me how to do my job. I could just build it the way I wanted. And I only knew one way because I had just like learned. So I was able to kind of, pretty quickly just say, okay, I'm just going to do this. And with experience, I found where I was able to maybe make it more efficient and be like, okay, here's certain parts of the process that would make sense in a different context, but because it's still such a small startup that's still trying to prove product market fit, really like slick UI is not necessary right now. Mm-hmm. And also because it's early, because it's trying to find product market fit, putting a lot of time into sort of like user research documentation didn't make a lot of sense, because it's like, I wasn't somehow like aggregating qualitative data from lots of people. So one thing I did was that I kind of, for the most part, skipped personas, because the persona was like an actual guy. And it would be weird to be like, oh, I'm going to like make a persona that somehow aggregate. It's just like, there was like, like early on we had one power user. And so I just made sure to like talk to him like every other week. And it was a chance for him to sort of, you say, this isn't working, that isn't working. So it was a chance for him to sort of be heard and essentially become like our most important user, because if he complained, we would listen and we'd figure out like what to improve. So, I mean, it was mutually beneficial, because I was getting lots of qualitative stuff from him. And sometimes, it wasn't like, this is not the thing that I need to send out surveys for, or it's pretty much like, it's also, it's a weird sector, because the construction industry is pretty much the last bastion of like analog processes. And I think our biggest hurdle is just convincing people who do something a really like slow, laborious way that there's a better way to do it, because they've gotten so good at doing it the bad way. Like, they're incredibly good at it, So it's sort of like, so that's what's tough, is like, we can actually make this a lot easier for you. And it's starting to change. I think now what's really made the difference is in Europe, these like ESG guidelines. Basically, it's suddenly risky to start building a project that you won't be able to prove and get certificates and prove it was built in a certain like sustainable way. And suddenly they're like, oh, okay, the way we do stuff isn't going to work right now. Oh yeah, we do need to be able to have proper visibility of this entire supply chain, where before it would be like, oh, I don't know, the subcontractor, I don't know where he bought that wood from. I mean, there's just no transparency at all. And that's kind of what we're fixing. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting problem. And it's true that there's not like, there's a few people a few companies working on this, but it isn't like, there's not even like a box I can put this in. I can't say like, oh, it's not exactly project management software. It's not exactly like a kind of online marketplace. It's kind of has elements of both, but it's sort of its own thing. And that's makes it fun.
Yeah. I think particularly in the traditional industries, you always have that those two challenges. That first challenge of actually developing and delivering the technology, and then communicating to people and convincing people that the technology provides like a new way of doing things. And that second challenge can be just as big, or if not bigger, than the first one as well.
Yeah.
Because we find, I mean, as we talked about with the kind of the personal attention you get from the mentor and the tutor, and that model of education and communicating, how much more effective that can be than sitting in a classroom with 30 other people, is still a challenge, even though you have this big difference or big improvement on the level of effectiveness. So yeah, I empathize with your challenge there. Cool.
It's an
And
interesting problem to have.
the last question about the job is really the difference between the reality and the expectation. So obviously, you decide you want to do UX. You have an idea of what your life will be like when you complete the UX program and when you become a UX designer. And then you're in the program. I imagine those expectations change a little bit over the course of that experience. And then you obviously land the job. So looking back at kind of what your expectations were, how does that match reality, and where are the discrepancies there?
Well, I think that the main thing that was different was that I just had to find ways to make what I was doing fit the team that I was in. So, you know, I could have kept doing things like, let's say, much closer to the process I had learned, but also, you know, I jumped in, and the most important thing when I started was usability testing, because something existed. The MVP existed, but they knew it wasn't quite ready for like public consumption. And so I, like, right off the bat, I was like, okay, just because you learn a process that you sort of say, okay, it starts with research and it ends with testing and making, and then you kind of go back to the beginning and you kind of cycle through this. Depending on where you work and what the project is, on your first day, you could be anywhere in that process. Don't assume that you're like, okay, time to start doing some research and like start from scratch. Mm-hmm. You're probably not going to get to do your first project from scratch. You're going to be jumping in somewhere along the way. So I think once I learned that, and then also getting used to what the reality was on the ground. I was the only UX designer. I was the only designer of any kind in the whole company. So again, when it's small like that, you have to be flexible. So my first few months, I was like creating more marketing material than I really had signed up for. But I knew that was temporary, and you know, now they have like a marketing team. There's people to sort of do that. But you know, it was a bit like the word designer was just like, oh, you can make stuff, right? So even though I had this idea that, okay, it's all about the product, if the CEO says he needs help making a promotional video because we're applying for some grant and it needs this, it's like, well, okay, then, you know. So I would say I ended up doing a lot more video production the first 3 months than I thought. But I think it was also, but then that's an example of like, hey, this was something that I had done before that clearly contributed to me looking valuable to them as a kind of generalist. So yeah, and then I would say it was then the process of it's just been a matter of kind of whittling down to just like make what I'm doing the most efficient for the way that the team works. So I had big dreams when I started about a design system and like really cleaning things up, but it got to the point where I realized it's so early stage, and it's a lot more of like, it's a small team. There's way more to do than there are people to do it. So it's often in this kind of like, you can't often be in sort of like firefighting mode. So I just had to kind of get into the pace of the developers. And the biggest change I made was that I stopped sort of trying to have like my own process, my own vision, and I just plug what I do a lot more into the way they do things. So even though I'm not beholden to, so they work in 2-week sprints, I'm not completely beholden to their 2-week sprints, but basically all of my projects in Figma I don't have some like master project with like, this is the perfect thing, how everything will eventually look. Each project corresponds to a ticket in Jira, and I just do the design that is relevant for what's needed for that. So the trade-off is that there's not this kind of big picture thing, but if our efforts succeed and if we grow, I will be in a position, I hope sometime next year, where I'm not the only UX designer, and then we'll be able to start focusing on things like that. Like, okay, now it's time to kind of clean up our design system. But for the time being, yeah, just figuring out, like meeting the rest of the team where they are, and knowing when the only time when I would really push against people and kind of cause friction was when it came down to people ignoring like really important user feedback. But for everything else, I was trying not to be too religious about this is the process and the way I learned to do it, so it has to be this way. I was willing to compromise on everything except for like, they just told me that this is not working, believe me, you know? And so, yeah, I did have to fight a little more than I thought to just get people sometimes to recognize things from the user's point of view, because, you know, developers have a lot of work to do, and they have to sometimes break things to make it doable. They have to break it down so much that you can be so in the weeds that it's, in order to do their job well, you can't expect them to kind of be able to have that view and like go to the other side of the screen and see what they're doing from the standpoint of, let's say, a not so tech savvy user.
Perhaps a kind of slightly more philosophical question. Do you feel like the career change has kind of given you what you wanted it to give you originally?
It has, yeah. I just feel, I feel like the work I do every day is like kind of adding to something that I can say like, yeah, that I mean, not that I didn't feel proud of the work I did in marketing, but it just, like talking about going from like studying art and then video production and then editorial and then marketing probably sounds like such a zigzag path, but from where I am now, if I look back, it doesn't look as zigzag. It kind of makes sense that it's led to where I am. And so, yeah, I think that I have less doubt about, is this really going to like lead me to something that will still be interesting to me in 5 years, you know? So it's, yeah. And I enjoy it. I love being able to do like, just like actually design stuff and not only, you know, I mean, there's a lot of like, you know, documentation and writing Jira tickets and stuff, but at the end of the day, like I spend a lot of time in Figma, like noodling around and making cool little components and stuff. And I like that UI part of it too.
Cool. So that leads quite nicely into a couple of the questions from the audience. The first one relating to the future of the UX industry. Where do you see it going, and what kind of excites you about those developments in the next couple of years? Are there any kind of trends or anything that you see either globally or really kind of more related to your role that you'd be particularly excited about?
Okay, well, I am hesitant to be any kind of like forecaster here on behalf of all UX, but what I can say, at least in my industry, or my industry can be an example that there are a lot of places where, let's say, digital product design would have been irrelevant, where it's becoming more relevant. And so I think that if you're, I think it could really pay to be open-minded about what industry you end up doing UX in, because yeah, I think that we saw that the pandemic kind of forced a lot of things online that weren't before, and a lot has stayed online now that it doesn't have to be anymore. And I think that those opportunities are only going to grow, because I mean, look, if people who for years have been used to emailing PDFs back and forth to each other, and they think that counts as digitization, if they if their needs now need to be addressed by someone who can think in this holistic but analytical way about like designing the process and figuring out how they can achieve those goals, and then designing how it works and looks. If they even need that these days, and a couple of years ago they didn't at all, I'm sure there's even more industries that are going to open up suddenly needing digital tools.
Yep.
I mean, you could end up like, working in agriculture or all sorts of things that you would not think has anything to do, like what does a computer have to do with that? But so I think that's exciting. But also I like practical stuff, and I had no interest in working for like a social media company or anything like sexy, but I quite like working on like tools for people who have particular jobs to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a super interesting point, because I mean, when you say tech, one of the first thoughts is the Googles and the Amazons of the world. But I mean, a lot of our graduates don't intend to work at the FANG companies, and secondly, find jobs kind of similar to the job that you found. So in a smaller company, potentially in a company that's specialized in one very specific area, and again, potentially with transferable skills, having worked in that area before, but in a different department, for example. That's definitely happens quite frequently. And like you say, the kind of digitalization of everything is kind of underway to some extent. So these opportunities definitely keep on sprouting up. In terms of your continued professional development, like one of the things with CareerFoundry students is, obviously they're interested in that lifelong learning. How do you continue doing that now that you have become a UX designer, that you have the title? How do you continue developing your skills? And can you recommend any resources for that as well?
Okay.
That's from Callum.
So I think one important thing is to keep networking, but I think that you can maybe like tone it down a bit, and you're not having to, now that like you have the job, you can sort of think about like, what do I want to get better at now? You're not sort of having to network for the sake of finding a job. And you could maybe, basically since getting this job, I've met like 3 or 4 other UX designers, some of whom I've been able to kind of start like an almost kind of like, they're a bit of like a mentor to me, someone who has more experience and can kind of, give advice and answer questions. Other people are at the same level that I am, but also are the only UX designers in their companies. And so it helps to sort of say, okay, while I'm at work, I can't just turn to another designer and get feedback on stuff or check my thought process on something. But there's so many people who are also doing this job, but kind of isolated like this as the only designer in the company, that you find some other people like that, and suddenly you're a lot less isolated, and you do have some people to bounce ideas off of and get, not that you're having to like share your actual work with them, but even just, meeting for a coffee now and then and describing what you're working on, even being able to like have a conversation about like, oh, how do you organize your Figma design files? Like, you can get tips from other people with stuff like that.
I imagine you can get weirdly passionate about those kinds of things as well. I mean,
yeah, and
specifically.
Yeah, you passionate or particular obsessive, depending on like what kind of spin you want to put on it. But yeah.
We have a couple of questions about the program specifically, so about the UX program. I can kind of give a bit of background to those questions from the kind of global level, but it'd be great to hear about your specific case as well. So the first question is from Stephen, and the question is, how long did it take to complete the program, and what sort of weekly or monthly time commitment did it require?
Okay.
I can say for the UX program, typically we see 5 months if people put in essentially the equivalent of a full-time study plan. So that's kind of 30 to 40 hours a week. We'll complete it in 5 months, up to around 10, 11 months if you're working on it part-time. So 15 hours, for example, a week, to give you a rough estimate. And yeah, for you, John-Erik, then how did it pan out?
So I ended up doing it sort of the half time, so over 10 months, where I was putting in 15 to 20 hours a week, only because I wasn't able to commit like full time to it. But yeah, that worked out for me. I mean, basically, let's see, when was I? Yeah, it was. I started at the end of 2020 and then finished at the end of 2021. So it was like, yeah, basically with, I've got a 3-year-old at home, and because of the pandemic, like we had, like, he wasn't in Kita for a long time. There was no, like, so it was basically like, for I would say half of the time of those 10 months, I was basically like being a stay-at-home dad in the day, and then working on this in the evenings. But then once the things normalized a bit with daycare, then I was able to put in a little more time.
Mm-hmm. And the other question from Sean is quite similar, so related to what you were just talking about there. Is it feasible to complete the program while maintaining a full-time job? So there, to give a bit of background for the majority of our students, so around 90%, actually continue in employment, either full-time or part-time, whilst studying. And it's obviously the flexibility of the program that you can essentially do it anywhere and any time. Then actually it's very, very common. And then for John-Erik, then you mentioned that you were looking after your son as well. That's also extremely common. We have a lot of parents and a lot of people with dependents in the program because of that flexibility as well. So for you, could you kind of talk through how you juggled those commitments and the commitments to the program itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, the good thing about it being online was that if, let's say, over the course of the day, I had quite, like, my time I could work on it was in these little bits. So it might be like, okay, I'm going to have, like, a half hour here, and then a couple hours here, and so it can be like, okay, at this point in the morning, I'm going to do some reading, and then I'm going to think about it. And then when I have a chance to come back, I'll sort of start the assignment. So it was all in little bits. But then because of, I mean, I usually would have my call with my mentor, like when I had a call with the tutor or the mentor, it was usually a time that was like their lunch break or something, because that was always a time that I could do. Usually, like, my kid was sleeping then, so it was kind of like, okay, I can get a lot of work done in the middle of the day. So even though it's all in little bits, like, you can't do that if you're like going to if you're doing it at university. You can't like come to the beginning of a lecture and then leave and then like come back, at night and finish it. You know what I mean? So I think that it was a little bit piecemeal for a while, but in a way that was okay. I think that it would probably, if you're doing it around a full-time job, it would probably be less chaotic than that, because you would have like a slightly easier time to schedule to know like when you're at work. I mean, it would mean working, you'd probably do some evenings and weekends to make that work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I kept rather strange hours.
Yep. Such is the life of a parent or a young child, I imagine. One last question before we wrap up. If you turn back the clock to, I guess, what is it now? Just over 2 years ago, and you imagine you kind of bump into yourself in a corridor, and you want to give your younger self some advice before they embark on the program, or just some words of encouragement, what do you think you would say to your past self?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd tell him that it's doable and he'll succeed. And second of all, I would say, do not underestimate the job prep course. You are going to waste so many hours writing crappy applications that you could have done something else with that time and just waited till you finish the course, and then only have done the good ones.
Fantastic. I didn't expect that answer. Yet more endorsement for the job prep course. Cool. Then I think we're just about done with the audience questions. Maybe very quickly, last one. There's one from Talena that just came in. Would you recommend looking for UX jobs while going through the program, or when you finish the program? I can definitely tell you that a significant percentage of people find jobs before they finish the program, because they start applying, not in the first half or so, but in the later stages of the program. John-Erik, would you have any other further advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that even if you feel so like for me, I didn't really feel confident to start applying until I was almost done. But I still was looking beforehand, because I think even if you're not ready to apply, it makes sense to start looking, because you can just understand what's out there and what people are looking for. And I think, it can help with figuring out the story you're going to tell about yourself and the way that you're going to frame your past experience to make it to make people realize how relevant it is to UX. So I think it's good to just familiarize yourself with what people are looking for, and who they are, like who's looking, what are they looking for,
Mm-hmm.
how do they describe what they're looking for, because lots of different, like, like UX can be enough of a thing that people have different ideas about what they think it means. And so it's good to sort of know, like, I mean, yeah, sometimes people say they want a UX designer, but actually they only want a UI designer, and vice versa. So it's good to get familiar with the the people looking for you, so you can figure out how to. But again, that comes down to the job prep course, and it's like, you don't have to wait till you're totally done with the main course to do the job prep course, because it's really about, like, make your CV look really good. Like, what's your elevator pitch? How do you talk about yourself? Like, you don't have to be done with the whole thing to start doing that.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Then I'd just say before we end up that if this has kind of spiked your interest in the program, I think Jay's given a really comprehensive overview of kind of what the reality of it is like and the job search is like. And if you have any more questions, I really recommend booking a call with a program advisor after this. You can either just hold on for about 10 seconds at the end of the webinar and you'll be directed there, directed to a page where you can book a call, or obviously you can just go to CareerFoundry and book a call off the website. And they can basically answer any remaining questions you have or any doubts you have. Or if you're just interested in finding out more about the contents of the curriculum and things, any question you have, they can answer. And they're all very lovely people. And I'm not going to push you in any direction that you don't want to go. It's really about finding out whether this program and whether the field is for you. So if you want to do that, go for it. It would be great to talk to you. And hopefully in about a year and a half's time, then one or two of you will also pop up in this window and I can chat to you about the experience as well. So stick around, book a call, talk to us. We look forward to seeing you. We look forward to turning you all into UX designers, because that's what we love doing. And John-Erik, thank you very, very, very much for your time. It's been a pleasure, as always.
For me too. It was a lot of fun.
Then, we shall bid you adieu. And everyone have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
All right.